let's talk about sections of the IEP. In this part of the video lecture, I'll talk about goals, benchmarks, and objectives. In part two, I'll discuss the remaining sections of the IEP. So let's talk about goals, benchmarks, and objectives. When you're writing goals and objectives, the goal is a statement of the intended outcome or result of the instruction for the learner. The goals and objectives are the heart of the specialized instruction that a student with a disability is to receive through the IEP. The other section is accommodations and modifications. However, the real heart of an IEP is those goals and objectives. That's the unique specialized programming that the student is to receive. Both goals and objectives have four components: the audience, which is who it's for. The student will be able to, in this case, for an IEP, will, the student who's doing it has got to be the student who's the IEP for. So for our project, we're going to be developing an IEP for a fictional student named Marcus. So every goal and objective will have the name Marcus in it because Marcus is the person who has to be able to do the thing that we're specifying. There needs to be an observable behavior, condition, which is optional, but usually is there, and a degree. A, B, C, D. Audience, A, behavior, B, condition, C, and D is the degree or the criteria, the measurable benchmark against which you will measure whether the student has achieved the goal and objective. Let me tell you about benchmarks and objectives. They're similar in that they're specifying the interim points along the way before a student achieves a goal, but they're written differently. Let's take a look here. The present level of educational performance says Bob reads a fifth grade text with 98% of the words correct at a rate of 35 words correct per minute on 3 probes. So what that indicates is that he's very accurate, but he's quite slow. So we're going to write a reading fluency goal for him. So in each case, for both the benchmark example and the objective example, we're going to have the same annual goal. Bob will read a sixth grade text with the readability of 6.8 to 6.9 with a rate of at least 110 words correct per minute. And you'll notice it's the same here. But where it differs is that benchmarks are progressive steps towards meeting the annual goal. You'll see that it's written the exact same way. The only thing that differs is the degree or the criterion. We're starting at 35 words correct per minute, then we're going up to 54 words correct per minute. Bob will read a sixth grade text with a rate of at least 54. Then we see the same thing. Bob will read a sixth grade text with a rate of at least 73. Bob will read a sixth grade text with a rate of at least 92, and so on up to the fourth benchmark matching the goal exactly. So it's written the same exact way. All we're doing is incrementally increasing the degree. The objective is written a little bit different. These are component steps towards meeting an annual goal. Now, Delaware uses the benchmark approach. So we will primarily be using this, but it's important to be aware of this other approach because who knows where your careers will take you in the future. Other states use this approach, which is more like prerequisite skills. So in order for Bob to read at 110 words correct per minute, he better be able to read 95% of the first 500 words on the fry list. That's like high frequency words. So that would be one of our short-term objectives, getting him to master those high frequency words. Another short-term objective would be like, he better be able to know how to decode multisyllable words, specifically 2 to 4 open and or closed syllables. He should be able to read those with 90% accuracy within 5 seconds. He should also be able to read words with diphthong patterns because he's probably going to see those in sixth grade text. So here we're sort of thinking about what might be the specific challenges that Bob faces to be able to achieve the goal, and then we're going to work on that. Here we're just saying we're going to slowly achieve the goal, sort of quarter by quarter across the school year. The benchmark approach, here's another way to look at it, and here's how to actually write benchmark um, uh, benchmark objectives. So the present level of educational performance is that Annie can read 12 upper and lower case letters of the alphabet. The goal is for her to be able to read and identify all letters. So the annual goal is written that Annie will identify 52 of 52 uppercase and lowercase letters of the alphabet. Now look where we start. We're starting at 12. We're trying to get to 52. And look what we're doing here. We're increasing by 10 each time. So all we do is we copy and paste the goal 4 times, and then we just change the degree. Annie will identify 22, 32, 42, and always the 4th benchmark matches the goal. The way we actually do this is you first define the behavior and the criterion, which is in your goal. You subtract, you find the difference between the criterion and the PLEP. In this case, the criterion is 52. The PLEP is 12. The difference in this case is 40. We divide that difference by the number of benchmarks. We'll always use 4. 40 divided by 4 is 10. That's the number we're going to add to each benchmark. So we add 10 to the PLEP, we get 22. We add 10 to 22, 32, and so on until the last benchmark matches our goal. Here's another one. Annie can read a first grade oral reading fluency passage at a rate of 20 correct words per minute. The benchmark score should be 40 words per minute at the end of first grade. So our annual goal is that Annie will read a first grade oral reading fluency passage at a rate of at least 40 words correct per minute. All right, let's do that little bit of math. Let's take the difference between our criterion and our PLEP. 40 minus 20 gives us 20. Let's divide that difference of 20 by the number of benchmarks, which is going to be 4. So 20 divided by 4 is 5. 5 is the number that we're going to add starting with our PLEP. So 20 is our PLEP plus 5. That's the number that we're going to increase by. 20 plus 5 is 25. And then we just increase by 5 each time. And then we know we're right if our 4th benchmark matches the goal. If you're dividing something into an odd number, it's okay to, let's say if it was 41, maybe one of these you go up by 5 and the last time you go up by 6. It's okay to manage it slightly like that if it's not a totally perfect number. We wouldn't increase by decimal points. So sometimes you might increase by 5, maybe you increase by 6 on some, but the idea is that you try to keep the increment as consistent as possible. All right, let's do the same thing using the short-term objective or prerequisite skill approach. All right, so her PLEP is that Annie cannot read words with CVC patterns. She's at 0%. The goal is that we're trying to identify the behavior that we want is for her to read words with CVC patterns. So the annual goal is that given a set of 20 words with CVC patterns, Annie will read words with 90% accuracy. So let's think about that. If we were instructors breaking it down, like what are the prerequisite skills for her to be able to actually read 20 words with CVC patterns at 90% accuracy? Well, let's take a look. She better know consonants. She better know vowels. And she probably needs to be able to blend them. So once you figure out those sort of behaviors that she needs to be able to accomplish, the skills she needs to learn, you identify those skills and behaviors, and then you use the same criterion. So if you say 90% here, each of those should be at 90%. And that makes sense because if this is 90%, but we say she only needs to get consonant letters of 70% or vowels at 70%, how will she ever get CVC patterns at 90? She's got to be equal or above. So we wrote it. Given individual consonant letters presented on a flashcard, that's our condition. Annie, our audience, will identify the sound for each letter, that's our behavior, with 90% accuracy, our degree or criterion, and you see it matches. Given a vowel sound in a picture cue association, Annie will identify the short vowel sound for each vowel with 90% accuracy. And given 2 or 3 orally presented phonemes, Annie will blend them to say the resulting word with 90% accuracy. So the prerequisite skill approach requires a little bit more thinking in the sense that you have to break down what skills are required to achieve this bigger goal. You can't just copy and paste the goal 4 times and change the degree. You have to really think about what skills the student needs. Here's another one where we're taking subparts of a goal. Annie's unable to read words with consonant blends or digraphs, except ST in the initial position of words. That would be like stop or start. So she's at 3%. That's her plan. The annual goal is that given a set of 20 words with consonant blends and consonant digraphs in initial and final positions of one-syllable words, Annie will read words with 90% accuracy. So we have blends, digraphs, initial, and final, all in one-syllable words, and she's got to get those to 90% accuracy. So this sort of formula is you start with a goal that includes all the components, and each component is its own objective. Again, use a parallel criterion. So here we have consonant blends in the initial, consonant digraphs initial, consonant blends final, consonant digraphs final. Those are the 4 possibilities that we have between the type of sound and the type of position. In each case, we see we have given a set of 10 words, and we have a parallel criterion to our goal, always 90%. So here we have the same goal, but we're going to write it with benchmarks. The same PLEP, she's at 3% with these things. The same goal, we want to get her to 90%. So to write the benchmark approach, all you do is you copy and paste this goal 4 times, and you erase the degree, except for the last one. Now you do a little bit of math. Take where you want to go, 90%, subtract where she's starting from, 3%. So 90 minus 3 equals 87. You divide that difference by 4. That's your number of benchmarks. So we get 21.75. So we can go up 22 sometimes or 21 other times. So here we went up, we started at 3%. We added 20, basically 22, excuse me. We got 25%. We added 22 again, went up 47%, went up 22 again, we got 69%, then you went up 21% to get 90, which matches our goal. So that's a good example of when it's an uneven increment and how you just kind of make it work in terms of whole numbers. But yeah, benchmark approach is really just copy paste with a little bit of math. How do you determine the criterion? Now if you're asking yourself that question, pat yourself on the back, because that's a good question to ask. So typically we think about how ambitious we want to be. We think about what a year's progress might be. Do we want to sort of catch up to grade level expectations? We try to think about minimum competencies the student needs to advance. We could also use, if you're using like a CBM sort of data, like oral reading fluency, you could use national benchmarks or norm standards or growth rates. But typically, the way we think about this is no criterion is less than 80% because 80% shows mastery. You will see IEPs that have goals where the student's expected to do something maybe 60% of the time, 70% of the time, or even 50. And people will argue, well, they're doing it 0% of the time now, so that should be the goal. It shouldn't. The goal should always be 80 because if you did something 50% of the time, you can't really do it. The point of an IEP is to make sure our students succeed. If you don't think they can get to 80% independently, then you just change the goal to provide more support, such as with three prompts, or when provided with a number chart or a number line or a calculator. You provide more supports, but you do not lower the expectation. We keep high expectations for our students. And then I'll teach you how to use CBM data at another time and possibly in another class. Another part of the goal page is the supplementary aids and services. These are things that might be useful as the student is achieving the goal. These are some examples here. I'll give you a second to read those. What are some example accommodations you might give to students? Now, you specifies these on the goal page, and I'll show you that in a second. These are goals. The reason why we specify it on the goal page is because if we think the student needs it on a state test or sort of testing situation, we want to make sure they also have it in class. They can't just have it on a state test type of thing. They need it. If they need it all times, that's where we specify it. So extended testing time, repeating directions, extended time on assignments, something like a shorter school day or rest time. They might need, there could even be accommodations for students with physical disabilities. I had a student who needed all assignments reproduced with on the copy machine at like 150% magnification because she was not blind, but her sight required her to have enlarged print. And that's where we'll stop and we'll pick back up with the other parts, the IEP and part 2.